Notes.
Hi, happy to be here.
Muting everybody.
Hello, good evening, everyone. Thank you all for joining us for another Living Room series and another Lost Classics Roundtable with our favorite hosts, Paul Barnes, Joan Tewksbury, and Mara Fortes. If you've joined us in previous ones, you'll notice we have a slightly different format tonight. We decided to go with the meeting format so we can be more interactive. A couple things to note if you haven't already zoomed yourself silly through this past year. You can choose your view up in the right upper corner if you want to see mostly who's speaking or if you'd like to see everybody at once. Also, for the sake of order, we'll say, since we expect a big group tonight, you're welcome to use the chat for Q&A, but you're also welcome to raise your hand using the tool at the bottom of your screen, which will bounce you to the top of our screen so we can see that you're raising your hand and call on you. If we miss you, you can also just unmute and speak up. We'll work with it as it goes. But again, we're happy you're all here. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to the esteemed panelists.
Oh, that does.
Oh, and you're muted, Paul.
Okay, am I back?
Yes.
Welcome, everybody. You know, I think you're all getting pretty familiar with us, but I think for any newcomers, you know, I'm Paul Barnes. I'm a documentary film editor and producer. Worked with Ken Burns for about 30 years and also did a bunch of independent documentaries prior to that. So that's basically my claim to fame. And I'm also a gigantic film fan, as I think you know already. Joan, you want to go?
Yes, I'm Joan Tewksbury, and I've been a filmmaker and a director and a producer, and am now more of a teacher for Sundance, for the Sundance Institute and St. John's College, actually. But I worked with Robert Altman for a lot of years, and it's just so nice to see all of your faces. So it's really lovely.
Yes.
Mara.
Hi, I'm Mara Fortes. I'm a curator and film researcher. I work for the Telluride Film Festival and also for some festivals in Mexico, where I'm currently based. I'm a lapsed PhD student at the University of Chicago, but I feel like the lapsed part has helped me explore other worlds besides academia, and it's so nice to finally see some faces. So I just want to thank Amara for making it possible, and hopefully it can feel more like we're all in the same room, and this can be a more interactive session. So nice to see you all.
Right, definitely. So Mara, since you picked this film, do you want to get us off the ground? What would you like to talk about first?
Yeah, sure. So I'm actually seeing some comments in the chat. Marcia Swiss says that they got halfway through the film, and we were actually talking earlier about how this film is kind of like 4 films in one. And you know, I think the last time I saw it, it was for a weird reason. I had to write this film column for a magazine that had a themed issue, and the theme of that issue was pink. And so somehow I remembered the pink cloud from this Kurosawa film. and watched it again. But I think it's always fascinated me as this cinematic artifact, because it kind of starts out as this more, I don't know, kind of like Shakespearean drama set in this corporate world of, this CEO of a shoe company. And I remember that like very theatrical setup suddenly moves into this super fast train moving sequence. And I think because, when I was little, I had seen the samurai films of Kurosawa, I think are the most well known. When I first saw this film, I was like, oh, wow, like this is a totally different Kurosawa world. And yeah, I think, I don't know if, I guess I will throw that question out there for everyone. What was your impression of this film? And yeah, I don't know if maybe if someone wants to share their impressions, if they also find it unusual or.
Any response there?
Don't be shy. We'd love to hear you.
It kind of reminded me of film noir in a lot of ways, sort of Japanese version.
Yes. No, definitely. Yeah. I mean, that's what I find interesting about the film, to be honest with you, is most people do know Kurosawa as the master of the samurai film and the historical films that he did. And High and Low is one of the few kind of modern era films that he made during his lifetime. And it's very interesting because it's really exploring in a lot of aspects the kind of changes that happened to Japan in the post-war world. There was a major economic boom, and consequently there was also this enormous class divide that opened up in Japan as a result of that. And those are major themes in the film. That class division kind of drives the story of the kidnapping in and of itself. And then the theme of the business world and it being ruthless and cutthroat and corrupt is all a part of Dondo's dilemma in terms of whether to pay the money or not pay the money, to destroy himself financially or save a human life. And then again, to me, Kurosawa exploring Yokohama, and you could really see how different Japan, had become in the post-war world with the various sequences and the locations that he chose to show. And so that's another fascinating part of the film to me. It's that kind of social aspect that runs through the entire narrative of the film, but is something that Kurosawa was very interested in exploring in modern Japanese society. Also in my research, I found out that Kurosawa, he felt that kidnapping, in the late 50s and early 60s, there was a rash of kidnappings and child murders that occurred in Japan. And that was something that attracted him to the story. It's based on an American novel by Evan, oh God, what's his name?
Ed McBain.
Ed McBain, yes.
Yeah.
Who wrote a series of police novels called The 87th Precinct. And this was one of them. And but the kidnapping story attracted him because of the problem in Japan at the time. And in terms of Japanese law, if someone was kidnapped, the sentences were very low. It could be a few years, it could be 5 years, 10 years. And Kurosawa always felt that kidnapping was such a heinous crime that he kind of wanted to make a kidnapping story to bring more attention to see if he could provoke the Japanese lawmakers to change that. And after the film opened, there was such a huge success in Japan. It's really interesting because the laws did change, and kidnapping became a life sentence if you were, convicted of a kidnapping. So the film did help. I mean, there was a movement to change the laws anyway, but the film's popular appeal certainly helped in terms of people's awakening people to this problem. So that was part of the reason why he made the film, which I found fascinating. Again, wanting to explore something that was very contemporary in Japan that was a problem at the time, and using the narrative to weave that in.
And I think the other interesting thing is, because the sort of police procedural part is so didactic, they actually still use the film to train policemen in kidnapping cases.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh,
Mhm.
that's fantastic. That's fantastic. I mean, I'm a big fan of police procedurals myself. So when those scenes come on, I don't get bored at all. Because it always fascinates me how the police go through the processes of finding evidence and putting all the pieces together to catch someone. So those sequences, to me, which kind of are in the third section of the film, I mean, I find really wonderful. When the two partners stand up and they start rattling off, what they found out and how that relates to, unraveling catching the real kidnapper and unraveling what really happened. I mean, they really grabbed me. I think that there's a nice buildup of suspense in that third section of the film in terms of tracking down the killer. So I particularly like those sections myself.
And I was struck very much by the Kurosawa as a choreographer.
Yeah.
And knowing how to use space in those rooms of the interrogation, and how the rhythms of who stands up and the shapes of the bodies and there's not a stone that's not unturned to look at each of these elements of the visual. And I was also struck, my first impression was of how stark everything was visually outside those windows after the war.
Right.
And that anything with texture or history had been wiped out. And so you were left with this sort of blank slate of this awful kind of progress that was going on, that sort of fueled the progress of the crime as well.
Yeah. No, it's really true. I mean, Yokohama had been subjected to a massive bombing in World War II. So it was basically destroyed in the war and had to be completely rebuilt. So that, it speaks to what you're talking about of just seeing this whole new modern kind of city that has no remnants of Japanese tradition at all, practically. So yeah, it was a part of the reason why Kurosawa set the film in Yokohama, for that reason.
I think we have a comment from Leslie.
Yeah.
Yes, I was wondering if in your research, you discovered why the sentences were so low. Was it because there was little death that was more of a business proposition?
To be honest, my research didn't go to quite that depth, so I can't quite answer that for you. It's just all I found out at the time is that the sentences were relatively low for a major crime like kidnapping, and other nations dealt with it, much more harshly than they did in Japan. Exactly why, I'm not sure. I'd have to go back and do more research. Sorry.
This is actually interesting because not related to this film, but I saw a documentary recently about a man who was in death row for 46 years in Japan. And so in that film, they talk about the Japanese justice system, and this would be kind of like the dark B-side to to this film, but it's a system where the prosecutors have all the power, and it's very much centered on interrogation, and something like 89% of convictions are based on confessions, and you can be held for, I think, a period of 3 weeks, interrogated for hours, like 10 hours a day, without the presence of a lawyer. And so that ends up, what ends up happening is people eventually just confess so that they can be freed. But there's like I read this shocking statistic that 99% like if a prosecutor files charges against you, your chances of being convicted are 99%. So it's like a system where in theory you're innocent until presumed guilty, but basically you're, the prosecutor kind of plots the case, and then everything is, the system is designed so that you eventually fit that narrative.
Jeffrey had his hand up.
Yeah, can you hear me? Do I have the mute off?
Yeah, yes, we can hear you.
Yes.
Yeah, my wife pointed out to me something I didn't realize till the end, which is although the film is dominated both in number and in words and so on, and action by the male characters, it's the wife, and at the end, the killer's one statement about his mother that bring in crying, that his mother would be crying over him.
Yes.
That bring in a quiet conscience, or certainly with the main character going back and forth what to do. And his wife is the only consistent one in saying, in pushing him towards the decision he finally comes to from a
Right.
moral point of view. And we've seen a lot of Kurosawa films, starting way back with Yojimbo and Rashomon and all of them. And I don't remember many female characters. So it's struck my wife, and then it struck me when I thought about it, that they, as limited as it was significant in this film. And I don't know if he's treated women that way in other films or not.
Mhm.
And her quietness, in just her stately quietness, she makes a very powerful impression, because she is, as you say, the only female in this vast array of male characters. And then, of course, at the end, Mara and I have decided that it became a zombie movie. So then the other women that you're seeing in the end are of a different breed, so to speak, bless their hearts. But I agree, there was great power in how he used that female character.
Yeah. No, I
And
have
I
to.
think that at some point someone asked Kurosawa about female characters, and he said that was definitely not his arena or specialty. But it is interesting that in this film, it's actually the wife's agency that causes the husband to decide, to pay the ransom for his chauffeur's son, because the wife says something like, "Oh, my husband would never let the child die," to the police. And so kind of corners Gondo to make the decision to
So she's the
come up with a ransom.
she's the conscience.
Yes.
She's the conscience.
She's the
Yeah.
conscience of the film. Yeah, I just wanted to say that I came in a little bit late, so maybe I missed the very beginning, but I love this film. I love the choreography of Kurosawa. I mean, just watching him place those people in that space everywhere was just gorgeous. And it reminded me so much, of course, of Seven Samurai. And I love seeing 4 of the Seven Samurai in the movie.
Yes.
There were 4 actors who were the 7 samurai, and it was like, there's the crazy guy right there.
I know. Yeah, Kurosawa had a habit of falling in love with certain actors and wanting to use them over and over again. So you do see them come back, often in his films, whether they're in a major role or in a minor one. I think they admired him so and liked to work with him. And so if he offered them even a tiny part, they would come back and do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think Diana Rico has her hand up, or had her hand up a little bit ago.
Thank you. It's Diana, actually.
Diana, okay, sorry.
Thank you. Gracias. Oh, now I'm trying to remember my question, because I have so many. The ending and Toshiro Mifune's performance, where he goes from being this huge personality at the beginning and in that room, and by the end, it's such an internal change that's happened for him. And I'd love to hear Joan and Paul and Mara just comment on what they make of that ending.
Discussion.
Yeah.
Well, apologies to Marsha, who hasn't seen the ending of the film. You can cover your ears. This will be a spoiler. Sorry, that was just a preamble to the But we had talked about how yes, this film is reminiscent of film noir and reminiscent of police procedurals, but it's also odd in that usually in the end you get to find out the motive for the crime, and here you never really get that. Instead, you get this confrontation between Gondo, Toshiro Mifune's character, and the kidnapper, and the way that scene is shot, at some point their faces are superimposed. So for me, how I read that is that Gondo could have been that person too. There's this kind of doubling, but also that the kidnapper, because you never get any interiority or psychology, is more like a placeholder. He's like a screen. And I think there's certain elements to his characterization that emphasize that with the sunglasses, that there's no access to his interior life. He's just like a reflection of something.
Well,
So
why do you think he did that? I mean, why do you think that's an important part of the story? You don't know about the motive.
I think because, I mean, there's some elements to where it could be class resentment, but then, he's a med student, so it's not like he's not the, like the old man in the incinerator. It's not sort of that, but it could be, kind of this just delusion of grandeur, or just because, I think that there's even though this is not a samurai film, there's this emphasis on like an honor code and this idea that society working together to, find this criminal. But on the side of the criminal, it's like this empty figure that you never, I think that it's empty so that you can project whatever you think onto that figure. But I don't know.
That's funny.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean,
Or maybe so you don't have this cathartic moment, you just have this flat character.
Right.
That never lives up to the image of the, but it just, you're almost disappointed that when you first see the kidnapper, that's the kidnapper.
Yeah, he's too good looking. Yeah, he's kind of cute,
Right. Yeah. I mean, for me, I think that Kurosawa, I mean, you could argue and say that the character is somewhat underdeveloped, but there's also an aspect to it where I think that Kurosawa wanted to keep him very mysterious. I mean, maybe it's a little too cartoony in a certain way, but you definitely read him as a sociopath for sure. There's no other reason really why he would be doing what he wanted to do. I mean, you discover that he can see Gondo's, large house, gorgeous house, right from his slum window. And in the last scene, he says, I was sitting down here freezing in the winter and sweating and sweltering in the summer, and you're up in heaven, in
with
this
air conditioning.
With air conditioning, right? I mean, that's as close as you get to a kind of motivation. It does have to do with that class envy. The original Japanese title actually translate the actual title of the film is Heaven and Hell. And I think that gives you a bit of a clue as to what Kurosawa was thinking about the differences in the life between Gondo and the kidnapper. Even though he is a med student, and you sort of do wonder why someone who was about to become a doctor would do what he does. But, like with so many sociopaths, you never quite know why they're motivated to do what they do. So
he is opaque in that, and also with the reflection of the glasses, he reflects back to you. You are seeing yourself in him in a way. And seeing this film and what just happened in Atlanta, and you think about the character who is responsible for that atrocity in Atlanta, there is an opaqueness to that individual that I will never know, I guess. But it seemed to me what you were saying, Mara, about it being a place card in a way for that element of a society that we don't know. We don't know who it is among us.
Mhm.
And yes, he was much too handsome.
Well, he's
I wanted
also,
to know,
if anyone
I
has,
wanted to know his backstory. I really did. I want a whole story about another whole film about him.
yeah, I also didn't realize that. I don't know if you've seen this film Tampopo. It's like this spoof of like spaghetti westerns, but it's really a foodie film about a ramen shop. It's
Right.
I think Criterion also has it. Anyway, the
Yes.
kidnapper, the same actor is in Tampopo, and he plays this kind of John Wayne type cowboy.
Oh, good.
So it's an interesting contrast.
Yeah, right.
Well,
You know, it is, I mean, going back to your question about Gondo and his journey in the film, you know, I think it is really fascinating the way in which he's written. Because in that first sequence, you know, he's so torn between saving his fortune and thinking about his business future, you know, and you know, to me, one of the nice twists in the film is, you know, initially he's so upset because he thinks it's his son, and you know, he's leaning towards giving the money, and then when he finds out it's the chauffeur's son, he pulls back, and it's like, oh well, you know, I'm not gonna destroy my fortune, you know, and that's when the wife gets so involved, you know, behind the, you know, in a subtle way in the background, you know, and reacting to the chauffeur's pleading at that point. And you know what's great about Mifune's performance is you see him, he's constantly thinking in that first sequence, you know, which runs almost an hour long in that room, and he goes through so many changes in you know, his expressions and in what he talks about, and I mean, it's really pretty remarkable, you know. But it you know, it with his assistant too, pushing him constantly, you know, do I go to Osaka and give the check over to, you know, the man who's going to help us take over the company? You know, he's constantly pushing Gondo, at the same time that his wife is doing a much more subtle push, you know, for him to save the life of a child. And so you see, you know, Gondo going through this dilemma and really coming down on the right side of the choice. To save the child and, you know, to let his fortune go, and, you know, they'll deal with it however they need to deal with it. I mean, even his wife says to him at one point that, you know, we can just start over, you know. You know, and it's interesting too to watch him in the train scene, because he's so, at that point, he's so with the police and he's so hell-bent to get the money to the kidnappers and to save the chauffeur's son. And in fact, when he does save him, that shot is a long shot. The police are in the foreground, and Gondo goes up to embrace the boy, and he really hugs him tightly in the background. And the police watch Gondo, and these police have also been watching him, this torment he's been going through about what he's going to do. And one of the policemen says there, you know, it's like, we have to do absolutely the best that we can possibly do because we really have to help Mr. Gondo, you know, recover from this. I mean, it's a really nice piece of dialogue, you know, coming from the police at that moment. It's a wonderful kind of end sequence there at the kidnap when he saves the son.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I thought that the Greek, all the police acted as sort of a Greek chorus for the hero, or you know, the hero, anti-hero, whatever you want to call him, Toshiro Mifune, who he goes from being pretty, you know, a very powerful guy to being kind of brought down, but yet he's ennobled. He sort of, it's a moral ending, and you feel like he has saved his soul.
Yes.
Basically.
Right.
And it doesn't matter, you know that he's going to be fine. He's
Yeah.
going to be just fine. Yeah.
Yeah.
That wasn't the impression I got at all. You know, he made the right decision, but in the end, he's at least in the language of the film, he's diminished by doing the heroic thing, which was one of the things I liked about how it sort of plays with your expectations regarding character.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I mean, I think you could definitely read it that way, because he's in that final scene, he's so subdued, you know. You don't feel a sense of power emanating off him at all. But he's also very calm.
Yeah.
He's not going to allow the kidnapper to goad him. He's not going to allow the kidnapper to get to him. It's like, you've done this horrible thing to me, but you know, I'm going to withstand it in a way. And he talks about joining another shoe company that's smaller than National Shoe, but he's hoping he's going to, you know, make it into something as good as National Shoe. So there is, you know, there is a kind of determination that's still there, even though he is in many ways diminished.
I guess maybe it's more about role. He went from the protagonist to supporting character.
Yeah.
No, I don't think so. I don't see it that way anyway. I don't see him as a supporting character at the end. I see him as I don't want to say a Christ-like figure, because that would be overkill. But I mean, he's really kind of spiritually, he's centered, and he knows himself, and he feels okay, and his wife feels okay, and he's done the right thing. And I think that's what the Japanese care about. I mean, or at least that's what Kurosawa cares about.
Yes, definitely Kurosawa. Yeah.
And Diana also mentions, you know, that she doesn't read him as diminished, but it's more that he acquires humility and he sheds this sort of overblown ego.
Yes.
Yes.
And I just want to make sure, because Leslie and Jeffrey have had their hands up, so
Yeah.
If you want to say something, maybe Jeffrey and then Leslie.
Yeah, just a couple of things. I think the fact that he wants to make shoes the right way, that he's always made shoes the right way, that he grew up making shoes the right way, is part of the overarching thing of what Japan used to care about and what's happened with the new industrialization,
Yeah.
and the cheap shoe and the like. And the two most modern young men characters are his assistant, who at first we think is going to be loyal, turns out to be as bad as the other corporate board men.
Yes.
And the killer himself, as anonymous as he is with the glasses and so on, is the most modern looking man in the movie. He's dashing, he's got these glasses. He's the hollow modern man in a sense. And the other old thing that helps the police, where the shoes, his caring about something important, or an anchor for the main character, it was interesting to me that one of the key clues turns out to be the oldest trolley that they don't use anymore, except it's still there, the single line, and it's an old man, one of the oldest trolley men, who knows enough about it and speaks of it with enthusiasm.
Yes, you're right.
And I thought that was also, in a subtle, small way, part of this overarching issue of change and social change and industrial change, values within the country.
Yeah, I think that's one of the most remarkable scenes in terms of the clues. You know, the audio tape where they hear the sound of the trolley wire, you know, that leads them to that area. I thought that was a fascinating part of the investigation, and yeah, I understand completely what you mean, Jeffrey, about, you know, this older worker who knows the old Japan in a certain way so well that he can be of help to the investigation. Yeah, it was a really interesting, wonderful detail that's in the film.
And again, these resonances are happening. I mean, you look at the world around us now, and the attention to detail has gone by the way. I mean, we are mass producing, let's use shoes. It's ridiculous how we have diminished everything that we make in just to keep up, or to keep it fast, or get it to Amazon on time, or to your house on time. But we have lost the texture and the spiritual connection to why we do what we do, or love what we love to do. It's sad, you know, in that regard.
Yeah, it's true.
I loved what he said. It's yeah, very much.
Yeah.
One of the things that I found really refreshing about the film was the lack of certain tropes that we find in modern police shows. We didn't, for example, have antagonism between the press and the police. We didn't have antagonism with the community. They were very supportive of the police. We didn't have the personal problems of the detectives themselves encroaching on the story. And we didn't have technology solving the day by allowing them to find them very quickly.
Yeah.
So all of that was refreshing. One scene that there was another scene with some women in it. They didn't have a speaking role, but that Yokohama nightclub with all of the military in there and the gaijin women, I thought that was fascinating that there were so many of them.
Right. Yeah, again, that was something that Kurosawa wanted to show. These major changes in Japanese society that would include something like that nightclub with so many American military in there, as well as other foreigners. Again, in terms of Japanese filmmaking, that kind of a place had not been seen that widely in films prior to that. And even the drug alley, which is it is like a horror film. I mean, it's when you get to that sequence, it's so terrifying to me. The way in which he staged it and the way in which the all of those wonderful extras and character actors were portraying those parts. Again, it's just not something in Japan that had been shown before. And so Kurosawa was hell-bent on showing that kind of underside of Japanese society that had been developing in the post-war world.
I think Les Daly had a question precisely about those scenes. I don't know if do you want to ask your question live? I can just read it from the chat. It's actually to Joan. If you can comment on how Kurosawa set up the crowd scenes in the bar and in Dope Alley.
Again, it is, to me, the Dope Alley, they were almost like set pieces, theatrically done. I kept saying when we first discussed this, that having worked with Jerome Robbins and knowing how carefully space is used to set up a dynamic, and then giving people the ability or permission to go as far as they want to go, to express the addiction, or to me, the nightclub scene is all about young women being able to be in the world in a modern way. For that is not something that happened before the war. But I keep going back to Kurosawa's use of space and how he choreographs people in a particular way, and how particular he is about what face is in the frame, what shape is in the frame. They are always a representation of something that we can identify with. This film resonates today as like it was done yesterday. And I will add that I've just finished reading the Mike Nichols book, and Scott Rudin in 2005 bought the rights to this film, and David Mamet wrote a screenplay, which Chris Rock was doing a rewrite of, that they wanted Mike Nichols to direct, and he was too ill to go forward with it. But I was struck by the fact that this material had been brought forward at that moment in time. But to answer the emotional question in those pieces, it's really through the shapes and sizes and placement and what those people represent that you can pull yourself into.
Right. Yeah.
Alan Perlman has his hand up.
I was struck by a couple of structural elements, possibly because we watched Citizen Kane just last night. This film is so different. The cinematography is very straight no cinematographic tricks or gimmicks or oddities. The only thing that was a bit odd was the pink smoke, which must have been hand colored frame by frame. The other thing that's different, at least than current police procedurals, is that Kurosawa let us know who the crook was long before the cops knew. And that's kind of unusual.
Yeah. I find that sequence where when we discover the kidnapper, it's that long tracking shot. You just see his back, the back of his head and his back, and you follow him up the stairs to his little room, and it's not till he gets down on the floor rummaging around with his stuff and turns around that you get a glimpse of his face. And at the end of that sequence is when he rises up, opens the curtain, and reveals that he can see Gondo's house. It's a terrific entrance for the kidnapper, I think, in the way in which Kurosawa designed the whole thing. And it's almost one shot, which is also pretty remarkable. So, I mean, he was one of the great directors who was a master of the long take, and there's a lot of them that are sprinkled throughout this film. In fact, the whole first hour of the film is a series of long takes that he did. I was reading about that he actually shot that whole first opening sequence with 3 cameras, and he kept them all at a wide distance, except when he wanted to plan a closer shot, he would put a telephoto lens so that they could get a closer shot without the camera coming in to intrude on the scene. And the actress who played Reiko was saying that he rehearsed them over and over and over again in terms of their positions and movements. And then he would do big sections of that scene in one long take, but from 3 different angles that he could then choose in the cutting room how he wanted to piece it together. But that's the way in which he designed that whole opening hour, was with 3 cameras shooting at different kinds of angles and choreographing the actors, and blocking them as if it was a stage play in a way, and making the relationships of where they were, like Joan was saying, the choreography of how they move against each other around that room was a part of his design. And it's odd because it's, you would think an hour's worth in one room in a film was going to be difficult to pull off and very boring.
It wasn't.
I don't find that sequence boring at all.
Not at all.
Yeah.
The simplicity, to go back to Alan's point, though, that there's no dynamic camera moving. The simplicity of how this has been set up, it pulls you into the characters so that you don't, and you kind of have to strain to get into them because of the wide shot.
Yeah.
So it doesn't relieve you. It doesn't let you sit back and go, oh, okay, well, I'll have potato chips now or something. You have to keep you have to stay connected visually.
Yes.
In the simplicity of how this stuff has been set up.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, it does come across as an amazing simplicity, but it's so complex the way in which you work it all out. It's quite extraordinary, actually, But there is a spareness to it too that also really makes you concentrate on the characters in the story, because there isn't anything really to distract you. There's not a change of scenery. There's not fancy art direction. There's not fancy camera movements. It's a real desire to concentrate on the story and the characters that's really quite remarkable.
And I read from an interview with one of the ADs, and he talked about how in those very long takes, because I think there's even one take that's about 10 minutes long, that the crew would get so engrossed in the acting that they would forget to do their jobs.
Right.
Like they would be so engrossed that.
Well, the staccato note in that first sequence with the little boys running in, and then the protagonist suggesting that they change roles, in the end implicated him and why his child escaped and the other
Yeah.
didn't.
Didn't,
Mhm.
yeah.
It's true, right, right. Yeah, absolutely. No, I think he worked out the whole thing with the little boys quite well.
Dana,
You know.
Dana? You're muted. You are muted.
I know, I just tried to unmute. I just wanted to bring up too that it struck me with the character of his wife, the children and the wife in the beginning, but the class thing was so amazing to me. The chauffeur that would bow all the time and then of course begged him. But the wife, he brought out, as I recall, tell me if I made this up or dreamed it, but he said, well, how would you know? You grew up privileged. Like, you know, she was of the upper class in a certain way. And he was saying, see, I made it. I made it like you. And I'm going to hold on to this. And then it was her, as you said, Paul, that she said, we don't need this.
Yeah.
It
Right.
was so admirable.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting
Loved it.
detail that Gondo married up.
Mhm. Upper class.
Yeah,
It's interesting, her wardrobe too. She starts very traditional
yes,
and eventually is wearing more and more, the clothes get more and more Western in a way.
yeah, you're right. Yeah. Yeah, again, it's all in the details. God is in the details, is it not? Is he not? Is she not?
And who said that? Which architect said that?
Oh, I don't remember. I don't remember. Oh, my word. You know, for me, oops.
Edwina has a really interesting comment about the music. I don't know if you want to mention it live or should I just read it from the chat?
Edwina, you want to come on?
Yeah, I guess, yeah, I was saying that when he first crosses, when we see the kidnapper first, you hear a refrain, which is Schubert's Die Forelle, the trout, on which the quintet is based. So first you hear the music and he's crossing this polluted stream. And, you know, I know the words in German and it's, you know, in this sparkling clean brook. And then he goes up to his house and later you hear it playing on the radio in the full quintet form. But, you know, you see this polluted industrial waste. So, you know, at first I thought, why are we hearing this music? It is quite ironic.
Oh, that's really interesting. I mean, I don't know music really well, but that's a great detail.
Yeah.
Kurosawa was kind of a cultural sponge, and not just Japanese culture, but Western culture as well. His father actually encouraged that in him because his father admired Western art and Western traditions. And so Kurosawa himself was really steeped in Western painting and music and theater and film. And so he probably knew the Schubert and you know, had used it very deliberately, I'm sure, Edwina. So, I mean, that's a wonderful detail. I didn't realize that, but that's a pretty amazing thing.
And there's also an interesting detail about the stream where you see the trash is that apparently when they first shot that scene, Kurosawa wasn't happy with the amount of pollution in the stream. So they actually built this structure with bamboos. So it would accumulate trash over a month just so that they could get the right amount of trash in that scene. So it's like a scene that took a month just for the trash to accumulate. Denise has her hand up too.
Hi.
Hi.
Denise.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I was so impressed with the expressionistic use of the camera to give almost the emotional temperature of the film. The beginning was like a kabuki stage proscenium with these very traditional, you know, dressed in traditional clothes with almost caricature-like choreography, you know, the gesture of the begging chauffeur, the wife who goes over and gets, you know, and this went on for a long time and it seemed like everything was in a stasis because he had an ethical decision to make. But once he made the decision, the curtains opened and then the camera was moving. You were on a moving train and you were taking a moving picture of a movie camera and he was running through the train. They were all running and the recipients were moving that were going to receive the money. And it was as if he set in motion the movie by making his ethical decision to give the money. And then there were other acts where the camera, for example, in the nightclub, he used a very long lens, and there was all this compression where the crowd was claustrophobic. And it had this whole jump jive, you know, black GI vibe to it, which sort of bothered me. It seemed to be a little associated with the dope alley business. I don't know if that's the way the Japanese looked at the GI influence in Japan, but it seemed as if not only was he doing this exquisite choreography that guides your eye to where the most important factors, but using the camera expressively in very separate acts, almost like he was doing different paintings, that each act had a different look and quality to it. And, you know, we go outside and there's that interesting sort of maze scene where they finally run into the chauffeur and his son, where they're trying to reenact, you know, where he went. And all of a sudden, you know, it's up against a wall and it seemed like no way out. And then they realized the boy had found a staircase, the solution up to the top. And all of a sudden you see the panoramic view over the beautiful bay. It was just such a masterclass to me in how to use the camera expressively to express different emotions. Whereas it seems to me that the auteur kind of approach in the US and elsewhere is to have a signature style, you know, to always have a certain look, and particularly to have your color scheme, your lookup tables, everything. So it's very consistent. And this film was very distinctly in different acts with different looks to the film that read the emotional temperature. I mean, the scene with all the detectives in one room was also very interesting, that he had this big crowd scene to stand up and present and solve something. Usually you're used to the evidence board and a few people, you know, on their computer. Anyway, enough said.
I know. Was it, Denise, those scenes in the police room where they're all discussing the evidence and stuff, you know, it's crazy to have all that many people in there.
Right.
But I kept thinking, you know, Kurosawa's, you know, he's a little bit overtaken by Rembrandt here. You know, he wants to have this mass of
Right.
figures, you know, that he can place in certain ways and create a painterly composition. You know, I think he was just drawn to, you know, the fact that he could do that and play with that.
But there's also something very poetic about the fact that there's like these two channels, you know, there's the sort of policeman and the very sophisticated surveillance, and then there's the little kid being driven around to see what he can remember. And they both, you know, come to the there's one scene where the policemen are holding the drawing that the little kid made about the bandage or something in the hand of the kidnapper, and they hold it up, you know, like that's the evidence they have is the little kid's drawings. I find that really sweet. And
oh, I know, I love that detail too. It is great. It's really great. Oh man, you know, in many ways, you know, Kurosawa made this in 1963, and it's sort of like, you know, after working in film since, you know, 1936, it's almost like he was at the height of his powers, you know, because there's an amazing precision about everything in the film. And yet at the same time, it still maintains this richness of life, you know. I mean, you're just so totally drawn into the emotions and the characters and the events that are going on, that even though the filmmaking itself has this wonderful precision and every decision seems absolutely right, you know, at the same time, there's this real life coursing through the film that just grabs you and just won't let you go. You know, it's kind of wonderful to watch a filmmaker who reaches that point, you know, where everything seems to be coalescing, you know, into everything seems right, everything is working, everything is good. You know, and that to me, that's where, in terms of his career, that's where he seemed to have been at that time.
Leslie,
Yeah, I
think
had a
wanted to
question.
speak.
There was a scene that baffled me, and it was when the policemen were following the kidnapper around town, hoping that he would go and try to repeat his crime. He saw someone standing in front of a shoe store, which it looked like Gondo to me.
It was
But the policeman didn't say anything. Nothing was made of that. I expected them to say, "Oh, look, he's coming up behind Gondo. What should we do?" But no one said anything about that. And I was very puzzled. I thought, did I really see that? Was it really him?
No, it absolutely was Gondo. And I think it's a wonderful little scene, to be honest with you. And there is a bit of police dialogue you may not remember, but you know, essentially what the cops say is, you know, when they see the kidnapper going up towards Gondo, they just said, you know, almost like, you know, what chutzpah this guy has, that after doing this to Gondo, he can go up and just ask him for a cigarette, you know, and Gondo just has no idea of who he is, you know, and because he's so polite and so nice, he gives him the cigarette. He lights the cigarette for him. You know, and it's also interesting to me that he's looking in the windows of a shoe store. And again, that love of making shoes is just in that simple act of, you know, kind of window shopping and seeing what the competitors are doing. It's just, you know, it's a wonderful little sequence. I mean, you know, it could have easily been cut from the film, but I'm very glad that it's there. It's a really interesting moment.
I thought the real turning point for Gondo was when he was shown mowing his lawn.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. That's a fascinating sequence too. And again, it's kind of a throwaway sequence. It didn't have to be in the film. It could have been easily cut, you know, but when you see him outside sweating, you know, the way the policeman is sweating and doing his own work as opposed to having a worker do it. Yeah, it does definitely signals a change for sure.
One more thing that was a little entertaining to me was that the police inspector, that actor, he was his enemy in the samurai film Sanjuro.
Yes.
So it was interesting to see them on the same side of the law in this one.
Right, I know. Yeah, Tatsuya Nakadai he's a wonderful, wonderful actor. And I don't know if you remember him, but he was the star of Kagemusha and Ran, you know, Kurosawa's two late great epic films. Nakadai was the star of that. And that was only because there had been falling out between Mifune and Kurosawa, that nobody has ever been able to figure out what happened in that relationship. But, you know, Nakadai became the go-to actor for Kurosawa in his late films.
I'd be interested in any comments about the resonance of Parasite with this film.
Oh man, no, there definitely is some parallels there for sure. You know, I mean, that film is so much about class, but we're seeing it, you know, really from the other side. You know, the wealthy man is the protagonist here, and in the other film, it's the poor guy. Yeah. Oh my God, Parasite. That's a one of a kind film.
Yeah.
Really an amazing piece of work. Yeah. Well, we're nearing the 1 hour mark. Is there any other comments or questions anybody might have before Amara kicks us all off?
Yeah, I really appreciate your all the details that were brought up, especially about the 3 cameras. Somehow that really makes a difference, knowing that that's the way that first scene or the first hour was filmed. It's amazing because we did just see the Orson Welles film. What is it? Now I can't think of it now. The very famous Citizen Kane. We just saw that and discussed it in another group, and everything was a camera trick, sort of everything, this trick and that trick and this trick and that trick, and for me, those things are kind of distracting. And with Kurosawa, everything seems to be so simple.
Yeah.
It seems to be, and not that it is simple, but it seems to be so simple and so clean and so clear.
Right.
And he's like a painter with a canvas where he just, as you've pointed out, where he has a place for everyone, this face and this face and this face and this face, and they all go together.
Right.
And it just seems like very natural. Like it just happened that way. But of course it didn't. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. No, it's interesting what you say between Welles and Kurosawa. And, remember that Orson Welles was 25 when he made Citizen Kane. And, Kurosawa was 40 when he made this film. And so all the experience of those years has kind of refined his film technique. And he came to a point where he didn't feel like he had to show off anymore. The way Welles felt like he really had to show off that he could make a movie. Kurosawa was so confident in his own skills that he could go to the simplicity of just the essentials of what he needed to show and how he needed to show it to tell the story. And I think that's one of the hallmarks of the film. You see that maturity in a filmmaker trusting his own skills to do that.
I think I remember reading that he used that same technique to film the big battle scene in Seven Samurai with the sort of 3 cameras.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of interesting that on the surface, the 2 scenes are so different, but the level of tension is really high in both of them.
Yeah.
Maybe higher in high and low, but.
Yeah, I know. Sometimes multiple cameras can be a real lifesaver for filmmakers. Yeah.
Well, and in the train sequence, they used 8 cameras. I think apparently cameramen of Toho were working on that scene. So.
I know. Yeah. I mean, the one thing that was a bit of a downfall for Kurosawa is that his budgets kept getting bigger and bigger. His crews kept getting bigger and bigger. He became a bit of a profligate in terms of spending the studio's money, which undercut his career late in his life, unfortunately. But it's just, he really wanted to do it the way he wanted to do it, and there was no stopping him. Almost all the later films went over budget and over schedule, because they had to be done exactly the way he wanted them to be done. So,
which films would you recommend if we were going to go back and do a Kurosawa, look, which, are there 2 or 3 films besides Seven Samurai that you would strongly suggest seeing?
Well, I think the film that really put him on the international map is Rashomon.
Rashomon.
Which is from 1950. It's really a remarkable film. And then if you've never seen The Seven Samurai, I mean, to me, it's one of the greatest films of all time. and so you really ought to look at Seven Samurai.
And Dodeska Dan.
Yes, and Dodeska Dan, which was one of the later films. It's really fascinating. I think it's his first film in color, isn't it, Joan?
Yeah.
And the way he used color in Dodeska Den is really remarkable. But yes, no, it's one of my favorites of his film, but it's not always considered, one of his best. But
yeah,
I differ. I think it is. So I think those would be the ones to look at if you're interested.
Paul, the question was asked what the next film is.
Oh, for us? Mara has selected a wonderful, very little known, little seen Russian film called The Ascent, which is by Larissa Sheptiko, who was a young Russian film director who unfortunately died very early. She really made, I think it's only 2 films, Mara, she made.
I think 3 films.
Okay.
She made Wings, The Ascent, and I feel like there's another one that I can't remember.
Yeah.
But she was married to Ellen Klimov, who was another director. He made the film Come and See.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah. But the Ascent is a World War II story, but it's a very different kind of take on World War II. You'll see when you watch it. I think you might be fascinated with it. It's a very remarkable piece of work. You know, and it was heartbreaking that she died so young because she had so much promise. So, yeah, I'd highly recommend that you folks hang in with us and take a peek at The Ascent, because I think it's a wonderful thing to talk about next time we see you all. Anything else, or shall we wrap it up, Amara?
Thank you. Thank you.
You all.
All right. We'll see you all next time.
Nice to see you.
It's nice to see you. Yeah.
Good to see you. This was wonderful.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.